In our last section, I gave you a brief summary of 100 years of history in less than 10 minutes. Please feel free to read more, ask more, study more. There's so much more to it than that I could cover. But I've brought you to the point where things are starting to get bad between the United States of America, the new provinces of Canada, and the indigenous population of what used to be called the Northwest, which is now being claimed by the Americans and divided up into states. The garrison that originally had been at Fort Mackinac, this fort had been built during the American War of Independence. Essentially, this is the same garrison and trading post that used to be on the mainland at Fort Michilimackinac, had now a much better fort here. So much so that the English army was not really keen on giving it up. This fort was supposed to have been handed back to the United States as part of the Treaty of Paris in 1783. Because it was such a good fort and such an important strategic position, they decided not to give it up right away. But by 1796, they could no longer hang on to it. At that point, they decided the next best position for a fort is on the St. Joseph Island. It would give them the same contact, economic trade with the Anishinaabe people, and it would also give them a very good amount of military control of traffic between the three upper Great Lakes. So in 1796, the garrison moved to Fort St. Joseph and then attempted to start a brand new fort. Did not go well at all. The fort was, the tip of the island was very isolated. It was very difficult to reach by the larger schooners from Lake Erie, which were required for the building parties and for building materials. They were well provided by the voyageurs' canoe routes of trade goods and other supplies, but the stuff they needed to build the fort was not available. So under a young engineer, Lieutenant Landman, they did the best they could. They built the fort not out of limestone blocks, but they built it out of fieldstones and green timbers. So the fort was not that good. It was leaky, drafty, prone to catch fire, and as time wore on, some of the original palisades were destroyed by storms. Making matters worse, by the beginning of the 19th century, it was pretty obvious that a war was going to be inevitable. So supplies that used to come from Lake Erie rarely made it past Fort Malden because everybody needed arms, supplies, fortification supplies, tools. And so we were kind of right at the end of the tail, and we did not get a very good fort for our time and money. So what we knew, and Isaac Brock had already had some correspondence with the captain, Captain Charles, that they would have to take a very aggressive posture, the garrison there, because they would not be able to withstand any kind of assault or siege. So that was understood. The war finally broke out June 18th, okay, when the United States declared war on the British and its allies and its colonies. So because of the amazing network of communications we had here, the garrison here knew about the war on July 8th, had been notified to, they'd be given their orders, and for them the war was on. They started recruiting militia from the trading companies, and they also sent the British Indian Department, which was ostensibly there just to basically enforce treaties, to provide the annual or semi-annual gift ceremonies to maintain the treaties and the friendships and the alliances. But they were also out there recruiting volunteers. There was a lot of interest amongst the indigenous people in supporting the English forces. The year before the war started, there was an action in Ohio where the guy who would eventually become President of the United States, William Henry Harrison, had assaulted the new coalition of the West, led by Tecumseh, at Tippecanoe, and he had destroyed their residences at Prophetstown. So there was a lot of outrage, a lot of support for the British, and an understanding that that's the only way they're ever going to regain control of the Northwest if the British were to win the war. So on the night of July 16th, Captain Roberts, Charles Roberts, now has his own force of 46 men. He now has been provided with 180 militiamen, courtesy of the Northwest Company, led by Robert Dixon and John Askin Jr., and at least 400 Anishinaabeg warriors led by Chingwachans. So their flotilla of a schooner and bateau and canoes left at dawn, or sorry, at dusk, and they spent all night paddling across to Fort Mackinac. They landed on the north side of the island, where they knew the fort couldn't see because the fort's on the south side of the island, and they were able to drag a 6-pound field cannon above with them. The following morning, the American garrison, Lieutenant Porter Hanks was in command, did not even know the war had started. Nobody had told them. They were surrounded by British militiamen and indigenous warriors, and to make matters worse, the British fired a warning shot with their cannon. So they surrendered pretty quickly, and the fort became a British garrison for the remainder of the war. So this was a rousing success, followed almost immediately on August 16th, when General Sir Isaac Brock, with Tecumseh's help, were able to capture Detroit. So at this point, the English army had pretty good control over this Northwest Territory, and things were looking pretty good as the war started. A couple of things started to go sour, like this victory at Detroit was August 16th. October 13th, Isaac Brock was defending Queenstown Heights when he was killed during a counterattack. He was a great figure amongst the indigenous leaders. They truly admired and trusted him. And with him gone and replaced by the Governor Prevost, who most people were not that impressed by, there was a little bit of shakiness to go with there. Things then got worse because Put-in Bay, sometimes called the Battle of Lake Erie, September 10th, the American fleet under Oliver Hazard Perry destroyed the British fleet on Lake Erie. What that meant is we could no longer supply or relieve or reinforce the garrison at Detroit or Fort Mackinac, because that's how the schooners got here. So almost immediately, in response to that, the garrison here abandoned Detroit and retreated back towards the Niagara frontier, where they could probably do some more good than just starving in Detroit. But October 5th, they left at September 26th. By October 5th, the Americans in pursuit caught up with them at the Battle of the Thames. During that engagement, Tecumseh was killed. So the leadership and the direction amongst the indigenous people was a little bit shaky at this point. So could things get any worse? Well, the fort at Mackinac was basically left to its own devices for the winter. Some supplies made it through the old portage route. There was a new fort being built at Nottawasaga, which was going to provide them. But at that point, they did not have a road connecting it to Fort York, and so supplies, very little arrived before the winter. So it was a very tough winter for the troops. They were resupplied in the spring and reinforced, but they were still pretty much cut off from Lake Erie. They were now getting supplies from Nottawasaga, so that would keep them in the fight for a while. Americans, knowing that, they decided that since now they control Lake Erie, they were going to control Lake Huron as well. So July 21st, an American naval squadron commanded by Commodore Arthur Sinclair headed north to basically take over Lake Huron and Georgian Bay. His strategy was they were going to have to take the fort back from the British, but before they did that directly, they'd try and starve it. So what they did is instead of heading to the fort directly, they went to the St. Mary's River where they caught a supply ship called the Mink, captured it, and from some of its interrogating its sailors, they found out where the British depots were. So his first course of business was to go to Fort St. Joe. The fort has long since been abandoned, but there are still some pretty large trading companies operating in the area. 3 actually beside the fort. So American Marines raided Fort St. Joseph. They burnt whatever was left. They ransacked, looted, and destroyed 2 of the neighboring trading posts. They left the American Fur Company, which was owned by John Jacob Astor, alone. Obviously, some arrangement had been made there. And then proceeded up the river towards Sault Ste. Marie. So this is something you wouldn't hard to imagine today. 700 American Marines in a flotilla of small boats are dispersing along the St. Mary's River, and they're looking for anything and everything. So between July 23rd and July 26th, they destroyed the trading posts, they destroyed the Northwest Company's storehouses, they destroyed the locks that you can still see a part of it down by the conservatory. They destroyed a boatyard that was being at Pointe-au-Pin. And they also destroyed their boat, their schooner Perseverance, which had been used to supply Lake Superior from Sault Ste. Marie. So all in all, 3 days of mayhem, looting, fire, and then the work done here, they decided, okay, now we're going to take over Fort Mackinac. So July 26th, they arrive at Fort Mackinac. First thing they do is sail across the fort and start firing on it. They found out almost right away the cannons can't fire that high. All they were doing was churning up the potato patch in front of the fort. So they decided to go around the north side and try and land in the same place the English had 2 years earlier. They were delayed for about 2 days by heavy fog. So by the time they finally got there and had their troops unloaded, nobody was surprised at all. The garrison was waiting for them, and they, as the Americans tried to advance towards the fort, they were caught out in the open with fairly accurate gunfire for the time and artillery, and they basically were pinned down. So the commander of this force, Grogan, decided, Lieutenant Colonel George Grogan, decided he was going to send 2 detachments through the forest on either side of the clearing to outflank the British defenders. What he didn't realize is that the British had already deployed some of their indigenous allies in those areas in case just such a thing happened. So one of the detachments ran right into an ambush, and it was quite a rout. The Americans lost 3 of their officers, including Major Holmes, who was leading the party. A lot of the men were killed and injured. They retreated. By this time, the soldiers who had been pinned down were getting a little bit shaken up by being constantly hit. They now realized there's more defenders than they thought. They knew there were now indigenous warriors in the woods, which always unnerved them. And they saw all the dead and wounded being taken out of the forests. So that's when they decided, no, this is not going to go anywhere. So they departed the island. They sent some of the boats back to Put-in Bay with the wounded for treatment. The rest, they decided to have one more unfinished business. They'd since learned that the British now had a base at Penetanguishene, which was supplying the fort. So they decided they were going to destroy that boat and capture the ship that was transporting supplies, by a schooner by the name of Nancy. So they showed up there. They caught the Nancy in the harbor. So the crew of the Nancy did the best thing they could. They pulled it upstream, and then they scuttled it there so that the Americans couldn't capture it. And then they moved all of their supplies into the bush. So the Americans destroyed the blockhouse that was there, but other than that, came away empty-handed. So at this point, Sinclair decided to take his fleet back home with two exceptions. He left 2 gunboats to patrol Upper St. Mary's for any traffic, to destroy or capture any supplies being sent to Fort Mackinac. And so in the meantime, okay, this has all happened around August 14th. What the captain of the Nancy had done, Lieutenant Miller Worsley, he took 4 open bateaux. He filled it up with as much supplies as he could, about a third of what was on the boat, the Nancy, and he and his crew rowed from Penetanguishene all the way to Fort Mackinac, on pretty rough seas too, I imagine. Just before they arrived at Fort Mackinac on September 3rd, passing underneath Drummond Island, they noticed up further north of that, one of the 2 American gunboats, the Tigress, was anchored there. So when Worsley reported this to Colonel McDougal, who was in charge of Fort Mackinac, he authorized that they fill up those 4 boats with the naval crew from the Nancy and 3 companies from the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. So they sailed north that night up here, and somewhere between Thessalon and Drummond Island, not 100% sure, they boarded the boat and took it over in the middle of the night, with some fierce fighting and some casualties, but generally a quick and successful operation. What the decision then, though, was this is September 3rd, rather than put that ship to use immediately and move it away, they decided to leave it there with the American colors flying. 3 days later, the other American gunboat, the USS Scorpion, pulled up alongside it, not realizing anything was wrong, and they were promptly captured. So in a period of 3 days, we took all the American ships that were on the upper Great Lakes, and we went from having 1 ship to 0 ships. Now we're up to 2 ships. So from there on in, we were able to secure Fort Mackinac for the duration of the war. And so that was fall of 1814. Over the winter of 1815 is when the war was starting to wind down. There were still some major battles to be fought, but on February the 15th of 1815, the Treaty of Ghent was signed. The War of 1812 was over. Of course, because that news had to come from across the ocean and through all the waterways, the garrison at Fort Mackinac didn't hear about it till late in April. So even though they'd held the fort for the whole war, on July 18th, they gave it back to the Americans because of the treaty. So the Americans regained Fort Mackinac. The British garrison knew they couldn't go back to Fort St. Joseph because there was nothing left. It was totally and truly ruined. So they decided to build a replacement fort on Drummond Island. This is called Fort Collier. So the British started there, but they never finished because in due time it was determined that the border between the United States and Canada was going to be here, not here. So that meant Drummond Island now becomes an American island, not a Canadian island. So rather than build another fort up there, it was decided simply to move everybody back to Penetanguishene. And that's where the military presence in Sault Ste. Marie and area ended. Thank you.